You are live, it said on the screen as Stephen was doing his little pirouette of love. And there you go. How are you, Stephen?
I'm very well. How about you? You okay? Half
I'm
term,
not
surviving?
half term. It's really easy. Just cooking stuff, looking after the kids, doing 28 hours of work a day, and just brilliant. I just managed to do everything all at once. I see all these
Well
posts
done.
on LinkedIn
Winning.
about. Yeah, you see all these posts on LinkedIn from people going, "Oh, it's really hard at half term." It's not. It's really easy. Just entertain the kids, folks, by getting them to do all your work for you. It's as simple as that.
Why do you think people find it difficult? Is it just because they're just so used to working that it's sometimes people find it difficult to sort of relax and come away from that and just breathe and do things at a different pace? Do you think that's why?
No,
Some people find it hard.
I think it's because most people's work these days is online. They're trying to focus, they're trying to concentrate, and they've got Sabrina Carpenter being blared out in one ear in the background, and kids screaming about a toy which they both want to play with in the other, and it's probably hard. At the same time, they're probably on the screen to their boss or a customer about something very, very important. And it's just really difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there you go. If you've been suffering this week from the half-term blues, do let us know. And
don't suffer in silence. Share your half-term tragedies with us, and we'll.
But that is why Stephen is confined to another room of the house today, because the other room is probably being utilised. We've got two guests today. We have Joe and we have Richard. I'm going to bring them in now, and then we can get them to introduce themselves. Joe, Richard, thank you so much for joining us. A full house today. That's the way we absolutely love it. Let's start with you, Joe. Joe, thank you for joining us. Where are you coming from? I think you said are you on holiday at the moment, or?
I am in the Lake District at the moment, so I'm in a hotel room in the Lake District. And I have my two teenagers, because it's half term, sitting on a bed over there. And my dog sitting on a bed behind me. So, so I hear you about the half term stuff. Not necessarily easy. I may have lost my temper with my children 2 seconds before we came on air. So there you
go. That is raw and honest of you, and I love you for that. Thank you for doing that. Richard, nice to meet you, sir. Where are you coming from?
Hopefully the accent will give it away completely. I'm based in London. Yeah.
That's a Cockney accent if ever I heard one.
Oh, absolutely. But no, so it's half term then. I don't have kids. My wife and she's working in another room. I'm sort of hearing about this half term thing, but it'd be quite interesting to know more about it at some point. But wow, hats off to everybody that manages to do everything. I'm not sure that I can balance all of it.
Well, yeah, it's the same thing really when it comes to people talking about work and sort of leisure time and work-life balance or whatever, and you see those posts on LinkedIn, and clearly you can tell some people don't necessarily have a family as such, or that it's just them and their partner or whatever, because they are able to do things like go to the gym. And or exercise, or maybe even go out, and as soon as you have a family, I think my personal view is, when I then see posts where people have a family and they still do those things, I just think, how? Because you must be leaving your children with somebody else to enable that to happen. Maybe it is that you've got a very kind relative that will do that, but in our case, we don't. So it's other than kind of just chaining them to the railings and deciding to go out, it wouldn't actually happen. So how do you get on, Stephen? Do you take it in turns in the house when it's something like half-term week, or?
Well, this is mine are sort of, and might be similar to ages to Joe, but sort of getting into those sort of well into the teens, and therefore you can get away with And I'm thinking legally, yes, you can do this. You can sort of leave them for a few hours without getting a slap on the wrist. So that tends to be the way. We tend to have a little bit of holiday each, and then we roll the dice, and then maybe invite the grandparent round. Can you just come round in the middle of the day to make sure the house is still there, it's not a war zone, and all that sort of stuff. So they're a little bit more self-sufficient. I'm fortunate that we've gone through all of that previous pain, and the pain is easing, but it's still there in the back of your mind.
Yeah. It's difficult though, and this stuff is I don't want us to completely focus on this today, and I want us to talk about the things that Joe and Richard you both specialize in as well. But it's important as part of what we're talking about in terms of work culture. It's important in terms of well-being for people, etc. that work, because the differences between one person and what their family life is like, or what that looks like and outside of work looks like, and another, that infiltrates into business culture, does it not? Does anyone want to kind of pick up on that? Here's a question for you. Do you think businesses really care about what people do outside of work, and should they a bit more?
Okay, so I'll pick that. I mean, one point that I would make is that I obviously work for myself, which I count myself as being ridiculously fortunate to be able to do, because I have the complete freedom to come away for half term and do things like this, to build my work around my I left employment when I had my children, mostly for that reason, because I wanted to be able to build what I did for work around my family rather than the other way round, which is what most people have to do to earn the money they need to earn to have the house and the car and the whatever it is. So I do watch people on LinkedIn talk about half term, and I always count my lucky stars, as the saying goes, that I created this kind of life for myself. And I know that not everybody is that fortunate. To answer your actual question, I mean, it's a huge generalization. Do businesses care? Some of them really do. Some of them really, really, really do. And some of them really, really, really don't. And everything in between. For me, the businesses that don't genuinely care and that don't make provision and that don't have those conversations, actually, for me, they're missing a trick. Because actually, the happier and healthier your workforce is in all realms, in all areas, the more your business benefits. And I think a lot of businesses don't get that. They don't understand that.
Yeah. Would you echo that, Richard?
I'd probably even go further. I've spent the last 25 years in large and small organizations, but I left about a year ago to work for myself. And I think it's less, so while there may be policies and things to help people manage these different things, I think it actually comes down to the manager level. There's some managers that go, I do not get why this is a hard challenge for you. Your work should always come first. This is what's there. But then there's other managers that will go out their way to bend over backwards, but it creates challenges. You can't, one size doesn't fit all. Every single person, manager will have a different perspective, even if they've got kids, from the person in their team. But we have to consider how people manage their lives. It's everybody's different. So I think we need to be sensitive to that as well.
Yeah. And I think we've started it by talking about kids and half term, but actually you start to expand it out and you start thinking about people who are caring. You've got people maybe who've got sort of physical restrictions, ailments, whatever it would be, that mean actually they need to split their working day to allow for a break in the day. So it's interesting. We started off with half term and children, but actually you start rolling it out, it actually ripples out to it sort of brings in more people in the working population who would require that, not just the parents, but the people who have other responsibilities or limitations as to what they can do, that need that flexibility to do their job.
Yeah.
Well, it's life, isn't it? I mean, people talk about the work-life balance, and I have a real issue with that phrase, because
so do I, to be honest.
I don't think it should be work-life balance. Work is part of your life. So it isn't you don't have your life and then work. You have your life, and work is part of that. And so the balance needs to be through your whole life. We all have different, your point, Stephen, about caring. You know, I'm at the point now where I have teenage children and an elderly mother. I mean, I'm 200 miles away from her, so none of it falls on my plate. I was going to say thankfully then. My younger sister takes care of most of that, and then I occasionally trip down and visit and realize how hard that is, and again count my lucky stars that actually I don't have to do that full time, as well as look after kids, as well as work, as well as do this, as well as do that, because that's life, right? So for me, it's about finding the balance that works, as Richard said, that works for you in your life and how your particular life looks. And that's everything. That's not just work.
No,
I'd agree with that. I've got a challenge even with the words balance, because it sounds like we're working a tightrope, and one foot off you slip and everything goes wrong. It's a work-life flow,
Well,
because
like that.
some weeks everything has to go that side, and some weeks everything goes to that side. But if it's only that or that, we're missing the trick. And I just think we've all grown up in organizations that we often fail to say what's going on. And I encourage the people that I work with, the people that I'm coaching now, and the teams that I'm working with, what is your life like? What is something that people in the team don't know about that actually might change the way that we all engage and the dynamics and the support? But if somebody doesn't know you've got an elderly mother or young kids or teenage kids, it's very, very difficult to actually work around that. Our lives don't work between 9 o'clock and 5 o'clock. They work between 24 hours, and I actually might be up at 5:30 because I can do some really great work for 3 or 4 hours in the morning. Then you've got other things to do, but then you come back to that. And it's understanding the way that everybody works, but also figuring out how can we do what we need to do together.
Yeah.
The problem is, it's quite hard to manage, isn't it, as a manager? Because you know, the problem is it always comes back down to, does that person, I suppose in my eyes as a manager, look as though they're being productive, or seemingly, you know, even if they tell me that the output's there, do I believe that the output's there? And it comes down ultimately to trust. But how do you even start building that trust if there's no mechanisms for building that trust in the first place? I don't believe actually that a lot of companies necessarily right from the outset build trust-based mechanisms. I think what they do is they build processes which are based around making money. You know, whereas actually if they spent a lot more time building processes of building trust, the money would perhaps flow anyway, because, you know, people would, you know, want to be there, and want to be productive for this business. Is that part of the problem?
Oh, it's a massive challenge. Sorry. The challenge that we have with trust is we expect somebody else to do the right thing, and then we will trust them. But you can't actually trust somebody without giving trust. It's the one thing that you have to give away to get trust. And if you assume that the other person is doing what they're doing with positive intent, it might not be your positive intent, then trying to understand it and then trying to figure out where we go together on that, you start to build trust. I think the challenge, you're completely right. Organizations are there to do a job, but often we don't even define why we're doing the job, who we're doing it for, what's the outcome. And actually there's no trust in that, because I'm coming up, I'm doing a spreadsheet, I'm doing whatever I do, but I actually don't know where it goes next. So there is no trust there. So for me, you really do need the big picture and the detail and connecting it, but then having difficult conversations on a table, going, well, Joe, how can I trust you? Well, this is where I'm coming from, and have the conversation. And those conversations for people are really, really difficult.
Yeah. Joe, I think you wanted to say something in there as well.
Yeah, when you were talking about trust, excuse me, it made me think about the whole working from home thing. You know, that whole, obviously during the pandemic, a lot of people worked from home, and then gradually lots of businesses have gone, actually, do you know what? not sure we trust you to do that. We're going to get you back into the workplace, right? I mean, that's a massive trust issue in and of itself, isn't it? They, and again, there were those issues during the pandemic when people had to work from home. A lot of, there was a lot of reports of being micromanaged and, hours being recorded, and actually, when you trust people, and this is what I mean about the difference between companies that get it and companies that don't. When you trust people, they will fall over themselves to be loyal, to produce, to work for you. I hear stories increasingly, actually, through the wonderful medium that is LinkedIn, about companies that have done away with the traditional, 4 or 5 weeks of holiday a year, and you're just allowed to take as much holiday as you want. That has a double-edged sword potentially, because quite a lot of workaholics don't take any holiday whatsoever, but which is dangerous and icky of itself. But you do get a degree of people who don't abuse that, who then actually appreciate the trust that's been shown in them and will work smarter, harder for that company, because they appreciate that they're being trusted, and they appreciate that they're being treated like grown-ups, right? Like adults, instead of children being told what to do at school, which again, I have an issue with, but that's a whole other topic. So there you go.
Well, that brings in another whole area here as well, which is that beyond the trust pit, beyond, offering the trust and getting the trust back and whatever else, everybody's coming at work from, maybe especially if it is a multi-generational business, from different generations of doing work in a different way, etc. And we have to be re-educated, do we not, in terms of how work should work now? Because don't you think that, again, part of the problem is we kind of bring our own baggage of this is how work works to the table. So even if the organization is trying to be progressive or whatever, people will step into the organization and go, well, yeah, but I've always done it this way, and or you don't need to know that. How many times have you heard that in an organization? Well, yeah, but you just don't need to know that. Well, but why do they? What? Unless it is the MOD and it's top secret. Quite often, whenever I heard that in an organization, and someone said, well, you don't need to know that, actually, there was nothing secret about what that was. It's just that person really wanted to join the dots for themselves, as you were saying a minute ago, so that they could understand what the purpose was, But no, that stuff you can't, you're not meant to know about that.
And that's
Another
where you
great
get
way to try trust.
Yeah, that's where the challenge can come. You can depend it can be a bit potluck as to what type of manager you get, because you can have the same organization with 2 or 3 managers at a certain level, and some of them decide to have that trust and some don't. But also, going back to what we were saying there about flexibility, some managers might be prepared to give people a little bit of tolerance because there's a problem with a child, or there's a problem with a parent, or this, that, and the other, where someone else doesn't. And therefore, it can be very you can be very fortunate or unfortunate as to who you get in your organization. So it's really important that there's that level of consistency. Otherwise, it can send out the wrong type of message within an organization that, well, they're allowed to do that, but we can't. And that can, again, come one of those problems that take place within an organization from that. And again, it builds into trust as well, the working from home bit, but also, well, I'm going to tell those people, but I'm not going to tell those people. And that then sort of creates that conflict within a business.
Yeah. And the trust thing works both ways as well, right? So it's not just managers trusting people, it's people trusting. I used to work in an organization 1,000 years ago when I was employed. I used to be a corporate event manager, and I used to work in an agency, and the directors, every time they would have a conversation, they would secrete themselves away into the meeting room that everybody could see from the office floor, because it had big windows around, and they'd have these secret conversations, and we would all literally be sat in the office going, what's happening? Why are they having a secret conversation? Who are they talking about? What's going to happen? Because they never came out of those rooms and told anybody what they were talking about. And it just engendered this horrible undercurrent through the whole company of mistrust, of not knowing what was going on, not knowing what was being said about who. it was awful atmosphere to work in, just
I can
horrible. So
imagine that.
yeah, the trust thing works both ways, doesn't it? It has to.
It comes down to an emotional intelligence as well, though. How would
Yeah.
you like to be treated? And while the way that I might want to be managed isn't the way that my team wants to be managed, understanding what they may be going through in their own lives and understanding and having an open conversation, which you need trust to be able to have that open conversation. Why do you need to know that I have an elderly mother or a young child? Or it, because I want to make sure that you are supported in what you need to do, because I know that you do a great job. I remember having somebody in my team that she sadly lost her mother during COVID, but to actually enable her, who she was outstanding, but she really struggled with that. How much time do you need? Leave this one up to me and I'll sort it out. And even when she sort of had a staged return, it was actually having that conversation going, I can't do this afternoon. Well, okay, that's fine. I'll make your excuses. What have you got on? And it's having that support with each other, because you know that they're really good. They're not abusing it. And that's trust for me, that you know that the person does great work. So you give them the space they need to do it, but you also give them the space they need to do whatever else they need to do as well. But for me, there's a lot of emotional intelligence in that. And we often put that to the side, put compassion to the side, put kindness to the side. This is about task. Well, actually, I don't want to work in a company that has no compassion, no kindness, and we don't consider other people. So bring the fluffy stuff back and spoon it in and spade it in as much as we can, because that's what's going to make a great organisation.
Joe, Richard, I mean, we mentioned LinkedIn earlier, and obviously this is going out on LinkedIn as well as other platforms as well. But as someone that frequents LinkedIn for a fair good number of hours a day, I'm probably on there for about 6 hours a day, if I'm honest.
And the rest.
And the rest. One of the things that I do see is that actually, when you talk about that emotional intelligence, it is missing actually in a lot of people these days. And just in things like communication as well, there are so many people make assumptions about how people, not only about how people are reacting to their information, but even just how they receive their information. Yeah. They also make assumptions about what people are saying when they say something on their post, and it's perhaps not the way that, you know, the person that wrote the post meant it to be perceived, etc. We don't seem to be I don't know whether things like being online and social media and all of those other things have actually made it harder for people to communicate properly. Does anyone want to touch on that?
Ooh, that's an interesting idea. And possibly because obviously with social media, you don't have the benefit of tone of voice and things like that, right? You are reading, you are reading the cold words and we all interpret whatever we experience in our lives through our own filter of beliefs that have come from when we were diddy, that we've carried around with in ourselves for however long we've carried them around inside ourselves for. And we see everything through that filter. So, yeah, I mean, I always talk about, you know, two people can have the exact same experience, do the exact same thing, and actually have a completely different experience with that thing, because everything is filtered through our own perception and our own beliefs around ourselves, other people, the world, how it all works. And obviously in a workplace, it's really difficult. You can't literally, I mean, it would be almost impossible, I think, to be able to treat every single person in the exact way that works for their exact beliefs. You'd have to get to know everybody ridiculously well to do that. But there are, like you say, understanding that that's what happens. One of the things we teach at the Happiness Club is about assumptions and the danger of assumptions. And we all make hundreds of them every single day. We make them and make them and make them. And a lot of them are completely false, except our response is based on those assumptions. Yeah.
No, totally. Assumptions is one of my favorite words for talking about, because that's what I think we do. I think we assume. And I think actually if we can just get people to a point of understanding that they are assuming and actually they need to stop making assumptions, but actually ask and look outwards rather than inwards, that brings us to a much better place. What do you think, Rich?
I'd agree with that. Funny, because I've been thinking a lot about that this week on LinkedIn, and I think my content has been sort of inadvertently getting very philosophical. But when you start with a place of positive intent and assume that the person in front of you means well, it might not be the way that you see the world, but it opens up to conversation going, where are you coming from? What do you know that I don't know? And what do I know that you don't know? And I was almost tempted to, I ended up writing my first poem this week, and I'm put it on LinkedIn, but I'm not quite sure that I want to read it out, but I'd be very happy to, because it is actually very relevant to what we've just said. So
go for it.
Yeah.
Give me 10 seconds and I will keep talking amongst yourself. I'll be back.
I love this. I don't think we've had poetry on the show before now.
It's groundbreaking for us, Graham.
Well, it is.
It's funny. I'm not a poet. I'm a technical person. I like numbers. I build models, but
I thought you were going to tell me you were related to Robert Burns for a minute, you know.
Oh, well, it's either that or sort of J.K. Galbraith, you know, it's who knows. Yeah. I'd written something called We Are All Mirrors, and I dubbed it as we are all mirrors, not of others, but of ourselves to others. We reflect our love and hate, of our bad experiences, of our own self-perceptions, of unresolved anger and pain, of a misconstrued memory, of unrealistic expectations, of bias. Let's change, start to listen, to understand, take self out of it, to work together, to make a difference. Let's shift to compassion. And I've honestly, I don't know where that came from. I was sitting there the other night and it was just some experiences. I thought, and I'd had a conversation. I said, well, wait a minute. Does that mean that everything that we think, say, do, offer, feedback isn't actually about the person in front of me? It's about my feedback and thought. So we're actually reflecting ourselves to someone else in the way that we think about it. So how do we change that? How do we actually put that aside and say, how can I make this useful for you? What is actually going on for you? And remove ourselves from it. Because at that point, you start to change the conversation. And I think until we actually start recognizing our own biases, as you've said, how it's very difficult to shift the conversation forward.
And I think to do that with compassion, as you've beautifully put, that was gorgeous, by the way. But to do that with compassion, self-compassion, right? Don't. You know, a lot of the people that I work with spend a lot of their lives beating themselves up for doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, or behaving in the wrong way, or whatever they think wrong is. So again, yes, absolutely. We need to look at what we're mirroring. Thank you.
Yes.
But with compassion for ourselves as well, right? Compassion for the other person, but compassion for ourselves, and to take it step by step, and to do it step by step, and to forgive ourselves when we don't manage it. I said before, right at the beginning, I had literally shouted at my teenagers 2 minutes before we came on air. I am forgiving myself for that. Whether they forgive me is a completely different matter. I will forgive myself for that act because I understand why it happened, what triggered it, what I was experiencing at the time. And so I'll forgive myself for that and treat myself with compassion. I think that's a massively important part of that equation, if that makes sense.
It's genuinely better to try and do something and get it wrong and go, what have I learned from that? It's not a mistake. It's not an error. There'll be things that, are not really great, but it's moving forward from that. It's learning as we go through life. It's experience. We don't learn from experience because you can do something 1,000 times over. But if you don't learn from we learn from reflecting on the experiences that we've had and allowing ourselves to build.
Stephen, when you're going into businesses, are you seeing that businesses are starting to become more compassionate? Are they starting to be more human when it comes to even when it comes to human factors?
Interesting, because as you were talking, and there was something I think that Richard said, that my mind started to go to another topic that draws it back to sort of workplace and that sort of thing that we primarily focus on. And I was thinking what would be really interesting, are you seeing it? Yes and no. I think businesses are becoming more, but equally some aren't. But what I think would be really interesting, topic we've touched on, is how you're going to start to see a lot of people being asked to go back to the office, which goes back to something we said at the start of the conversation. The outcome of that will be really interesting to see if businesses are becoming more compassionate. So if you think of some of the things we've spoken about, Graham, in you look at the last few weeks alone, and I might get the companies the wrong way around, but I think JP Morgan want their staff back in 5 days a week. Barclays are looking at 3 days a week. Other organizations are doing other things and querying it. I think the interesting thing will be is how successful are those companies when they get those people back, and do they show a level of compassion when someone is asked to come back 5 days but actually has a child sick, an elderly parent, a sick dog, whatever. That'll be really interesting to see. So that's to me, that's a bit of a good barometer. So I'm not directly answering the question, Graham, but I think that the success of those policies will probably provide some of the answers. So have these organizations learned how to be compassionate when they're asking people to change their working patterns? And that will be really interesting to see what comes from that, and the success or lack of success of those initiatives. And there'll be lots of other businesses doing exactly the same thing as well.
No, absolutely. For people that don't know, I do a poll every single morning on LinkedIn. I've done it for 5 years now. I haven't missed a day.
Yeah.
Every single morning, a poll. And the purpose of my polls is to make people think. And where some people go wrong with polls, in my humble opinion, as the king of polls, is that they use polls to try and get ridiculous answers to ridiculous questions. When you see questions that are going out there on polls across LinkedIn, like things like, should we all go to a 4.5 day working week, or which days should people have off on a hybrid working week, etc. Does it just make you want to tear your eyeballs out? Because it does for me.
I've thought about polls, but as a coach, I should probably be able to ask better questions. But my problem is my questions are generally open-ended. They're not A, B, C, D. And I'm sort of holding myself back from jumping back on Stephen's question there. So I probably get strong opinions on both of those points. I'm going to pick up one of them. I won't go to working from home, because that could go down a big rabbit hole. But there is something about compassion. I think companies are now talking about compassion. I think the words are being used. I'm not sure they believe what it means or understand that yet. So it's on the agenda. But actually, what is the impact of where this comes from?
It's on the menu, but it's in Spanish, and they don't actually understand what it means. Yeah. Okay.
I would probably agree with that, Graham. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm picking up again on what Stephen said. I mean, that's a really interesting point, and I will watch that with interest as well. And we've touched a couple of times on the idea of policies, and in my experience, there seems to be quite often a disconnect between the business having the policies in place and the people who work for the business knowing what those policies are.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a massive gap in quite a lot of companies. We work in workplace wellbeing, and I'll speak to a lot of people who say, oh yes, we have that covered. We've got this covered in our policy on XYZ. And then you speak to people who actually work for the company. They have absolutely no idea what they have access to, what the company's view on things is, literally. So it's a communication piece, right? There's a huge communication job to be done there. And the same as you've said, Richard, with that compassion thing, it's the starting to talk about it, probably because other companies are starting to talk about it. So we feel like we should be talking about it. We don't really know what to do about it or how that looks, because we haven't really put any thought into it, actually. So there's huge work to do there.
That's interesting, Joe. Sorry, I'm jumping over you, Graham. There, I know that
No,
you're
it's
the host
fine.
there. I'm not ready to take over yet, but I think we've got policies upside down because we often try and fit people into policies as opposed to policies into people. What do people actually need? I'm not going to go down Maslow's hierarchy of needs or anything like that, but when people start, they have needs. They need to feel safe. They need to feel that they belong. So we actually create policies that probably do the opposite. It compartmentalizes these things in a different way, but it's just so unconnected. And it's going to self-revert. Just you talk about systems. Humans are a system. They have needs. And however much you force it and remove the bad person, they are reacting because of what else is going on. So we have to think about how we can support the way that people act and give them boundaries rather than actually change that nature, because it just doesn't happen. Back to you, Graham.
I was gonna throw into that as well. Technology. I'm gonna go down the technology route a little bit. We know from the whole COVID period, etc., and the different ways of working that got escalated. They always existed before that, but they got escalated in terms of the amount of people working hybrid, etc. That we now have systems that enable us to work synchronously, asynchronously, that enable us to do things faster than ever before. It's part of the problem that actually some of the technologies and some of the ways that people want to work are actually faster than the dinosaur of companies sort of structure can actually cope with these days. When companies talk about being agile, are they really as agile as they think they are in terms of making those decisions and actually moving forward? Or are the sort of things that they use to be able to be agile, they're there, but the decision making is still quite slow, and we're going to have a board meeting next Friday, and we're going to discuss it, and then that's going to go to another meeting, and and it doesn't actually happen. And is there rub there as well?
Yeah, and again, I think that goes back to what you said before, Graham, about the generational thing, right? I think quite a lot of, and again, I'm generalizing massively, but I think quite a lot of larger companies, it's that, well, this is the way we've always done it, and this is how we do it, and this is how my generation thinks, and this is how we organize this. And so then when the more agile things come in, they just, like you say, the wheels take an age to turn, because that's how it's always been done. So that's the battle inside the company, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think a little bit what Richard said as well was when you mentioned compassion within companies, I just do wonder whether they're just buzzwords. They're just phrases.
They're just greenwashing.
Keeping up with the Joneses. It's got to, we'll throw in agile, we'll throw in compassion, we'll throw in flexible.
It's right up there with sustainability.
And ergonomic, as we've touched on before. But if you throw as many things at the wall, some of them will stick and it'll reflect well. So whether you said it was greenwashing or whatever the phrase would be, I just wonder whether do they actually genuinely mean it, or do they just want to do it because they think it makes them sound good?
There's a bigger problem, though. All of this is absolutely true, but technology is great, but all it's doing is breaking everything that we're doing into more granular bits. There's no one in an organization, probably even the CEO, that actually has a holistic view of what's going on. And if you can't see what you are working on, tech or ignoring, you've no idea how it works. Well, this doesn't work, so let's break it down a bit more. That's actually not the problem. Zoom out, look at how it actually fits together. And I think at the moment, nobody understands the role, nobody understands the purpose. I was holding a session yesterday, and there's a stat in the US that I think it was something like 41%, it might even be far more than that, of people that work in organizations have no idea what the purpose of the organization is. They don't know why the company does what it does. And if you break that down to teams, I speak to teams and I'll do a one-to-one with them before I'll actually have team coaching with them. What's the purpose of the team? Oh yeah, that's easy. So by the time I finish the interviews, I've got 6 different purposes, plus the one of the team leader, plus the one of the organisation. So immediately you're working at cross purposes. So nobody's connected. Everybody thinks that they know what their role is. So no wonder that we're always going, I'm too busy to help you. Well, you're the only person I should be helping. So what are you working on?
Yeah.
And so I think if we can actually start thinking more about the way that we're all connected again, irrespective of the technology to support that, but we just keep breaking it down more and more and more, and then we lose the picture. We've no idea what we're actually doing.
So interesting, isn't it?
Mm.
I wonder whether anyone's actually asking the technology, whether the technology knows what the organization's working on. I'd love to know that. I mean, like in an organization that's using things like ChatGPT or other AIs do exist, I wonder whether anyone's actually asking the technology, do you understand the purpose of this business, given the fact that you're getting all of this granulated data from all of these different people working in different areas. Do you understand the purpose of this company? It'd be interesting to find out what it came out with, wouldn't it? Maybe it has a better understanding than the people working there, which is scary. But there you go. What do we think about things like AI? Is it help or hindrance?
I think it has.
Use it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It has the potential to be both, doesn't it? An enormous help and an enormous hindrance, depending on how you use it, and depending on your intentions when you're using it as well, right?
It's recognizing what it can do. It's taking information that's there. It can chop it, change it, reconsider it in a different way, estimate what could happen. But it's not. I don't believe it's creative yet in that way. Not in the way that we are. It can help us think and it can generate ideas, but it's a tool to enhance what we do. It takes out all the grunt's work and all the sort of admin and pulling together reports. We can do that quickly because that's just information, and then we can actually do something with it. So it should save us time to actually do the stuff that we are better at, which is being creative.
But it's interesting because do we actually treat it like an employee or as a piece of tech? Because even if it's doing if it's doing grunt work, right, and if that was a person doing the same grunt work, we'd still communicate with them. We'd still talk to them about the outcomes a bit more than perhaps people would talk to tech, if you understand what I'm saying. And I think that's part of the problem at the moment, right? Because people are talking to AI as if it's just a tool. They're being quite lazy with it. I mean, I do a music podcast as well, and I talk to musicians about AI and music. And again, there's kind of two schools of thought there. One is that on the one hand, AI is being used to duplicate what someone's already done and just lazily produce something else. Other people are using it in a creative manner and are almost trying to break it, right? And that's where it becomes great, is when you try and break tech and you try and push it to the extreme of what it can do and try and use it in a creative way. But I wonder within businesses whether it's too often it's sitting there as an extension of the staff workforce, right? It's actually, if you think about it, if you've got AI licenses sitting there, those are other people work. That's tech taking over from what someone else was doing just by plumbing that in or whatever. But if someone's being really lazy in terms of their communication with it and not actually helping it, not actually fostering it, as ChatGPT would like to say, then it won't thrive.
Don't go there with that word. That's the word you avoid, isn't it?
It's the word. Yeah, it's great fun. I love looking through people's LinkedIn on the morning to see who's written their post.
Hate that word. I think you're onto something.
Websites, yeah. Please do.
It is. I think one of the challenges we've got is what should people be working on? What is the role that they've got? I look at my profession, actuaries, and it was a great phrase that the immediate past president of the Global Association had quoted, sort of Charles Cowling, because he'd said AI won't replace actuaries, but it will replace that. Actuaries with AI will replace actuaries without AI, and I think that extends to an awful lot of different places. I think many people that are analysing data, writing reports, they're saying AI will take their jobs. Well, actually, it should enhance what they do and allow them to do the added value stuff.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be sitting analysing data manually, because that takes up so much time and it's so prone to error. So allow something else to do it that can do it better, so it can allow you to focus and add the value and using that information to do what you should be doing. And so I think that's a challenge. What roles will change? It shouldn't be replacing roles, but it should change roles quite dramatically.
Yeah.
We should be doing better stuff. Joe, in terms of people's happiness, I mean, that's obviously something that's dear to you with your business, etc. One of the things that Stephen and I have talked about within this whole realm quite a lot is time. As all of this text come in, and as people's sort of job or the job landscapes change, one of the things that seems to have come out of work or the workplace is giving people time. You know, people used to have a bit of time during the day to just do stuff. You know, now people are just going from task to task to task to task. What's the happiness equation, if you like, for people when they don't get given time in the day?
Okay. So one of my catchphrases in the training that we do, in the work that we do, one of the catchphrases I use is, if you keep going and going and going and going and going, you will break. So please take lots of breaks. It's a really simple concept, and they don't have to be super long breaks. They can be a minute here, 5 minutes there, 10 minutes there. But our brains, our bodies need time to process, digest, rejuvenate, refresh. And if we're not giving them that time, then, and like I say, we keep going, then that begins to affect us mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, in all manner of all the pillars of happiness. And I mean, one of the things we teach in some of our workshops is a time management system, a mindfulness-based time management system. And one of the things I ask people to do is to build 1 hour of flexible time into their diary every single day, because unexpected things happen, right? And if you've jam-packed your diary full and something unexpected happens, you have a panic reaction. If you've got an hour of flexible time and something unexpected happens, you know already that you've got the time to deal with it. So your response is calmer more generally, which then makes you better able to cope with the unexpected thing that's happened, right? Because you're not in panic mode. And the number of times I have presented that as part of a workshop at a company, and it's always the finance director. And the finance director always comes up to me at the end and says, can you leave that bit out next time you run the workshop? Because what I say is, if you've got that hour in your diary and nothing unexpected happens, guess what? You've got a whole hour to do whatever you want to get a head start on some work, or take a rest, because you know you've got all the rest of your work scheduled in and sorted out. And I will always have, and like I say, it's always the finance director, male or female, always comes up and says, you know, I might be running 4 or 5 workshops for a company, and I've done it in the first one. And they'll say,
that's massive that's the case, because that's just showing that there's people see a direct correlation with making money and for what is false pseudo productivity, basically.
But the finance director in his head, the finance director is going, that's 5 hours a week times by 25 employees, that's 125. And then all he's doing is, because he's a numbers guy, he's just running it through, and at the end he's coming up with a big number like 7,000, and it's scaring him. But what he's not doing the maths on is the benefit that actually having that time and having those breaks would do, which would make the people more productive, which will produce the company more XYZ, right? That's the maths he's not doing.
Could I add a couple of bits on that, actually, because that's really interesting. I agree with all of it, and having been a numbers guy for far too many decades now, I get this, because the challenge we have is it's counterintuitive. The brain works in a certain way. When you start going to the neuroscience of this, and we've talked earlier about going more detailed, more detailed, more detailed. You get stuck in tasks. It doesn't matter if that task's an elephant or an ant. It's something I have to get off my desk. And when you work on tasks, don't take a break. You get sort of cortisol building up in the brain, the stress hormone, day after day after day. It will affect the heart. It will affect everything. It's not just, oh, you'll get stressed and you'll burn out. No, physically, the body doesn't work like that. It needs a break to actually go and do that. And organizations start saying, okay, I need you to be more creative. And I've heard clients actually say, yes, my company turned around last week and said at Wednesday from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, it's innovation hour. And you start to laugh at that because the brain doesn't work like that.
No.
It needs space to be innovative. And you might have your best ideas when you go out for a walk with the dog, in the shower in the morning, at the gym, when you're not thinking about that. And the best solutions I've ever come up with, if after being, I'm stuck in that, I'm going home, you come in back the next day and you solve it in 3.5 minutes.
Yeah.
If there's a neuroscience element there. I sat down with somebody last year and he said, I'm triple booked today. I don't have time. I said, okay, give me half an hour. And we sat down and I said, look at your calendar. What do you have to do today? He said, okay, I don't need to do that. I can delegate that. I can get rid of that. Okay. And we went through that. And he actually cleared out 3 hours in that day's calendar. And I said, what are you going to go and do now? He said, I'm going to go and do the same thing for every day next week. So immediately I gave him half an hour and he gained probably around 5 times 3 for 18 hours. And if the finance director's looking at it going, well, you shouldn't have spent that half an hour talking about your calendar. Well, okay, good on you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know
the numbers don't always add up, do they? The numbers don't always add up.
It makes so much sense. And you know what? I'm going to bring it back to content again on social media, right? Because it's kind of my bag, etc. What do you think the first thing I tell any client is when it comes to planning content?
Be you.
It's simply this. So go and do stuff, right?
Yeah.
Put in your diary activity, right? Because when you're making a change in the world, when you're going out there and you're doing stuff and whatever, you've got content, right?
Yeah.
You know, the biggest problem, and you'll see it all of the time on something like LinkedIn, biggest problem that people talk about is they go, I don't know what to post about. Or it's like someone will come up and go, I've created a 30-day content calendar for you. Well, what? That's nothing to do with you or your business or whatever. It's just 30 days of to put up into the sky. If you're doing stuff, you've got content, right? In fact, if you're so busy going out and doing stuff that's like great stuff, right? You can probably afford at that point to get someone to go and film it for you and put it up for you so you don't have to do it, right? But nothing actually happens in this world unless you go and do it, right? And within that as well, you need space, right? If you're going to be creative in that, you need just time. You need time to just stop and take a perspective on the world or whatever, because you can't produce unless you're full yourself, right? So it's, you know, people come to the table all of the time going, how do I do the task? How do I do the task? How do I do the task? First thing you have to do is work out the big picture, right? The vision of what it is that you want to achieve. The second thing you have to do is work out what you need physically, energy wise, whatever, in order to be able to start achieving that outcome, and then just go and do it. And actually, the rest of it, that may be what AI is for. You know, it's. I think fundamentally, last kind of quick question to go round. Do we actually think for a lot of companies, work isn't working?
Work's being confused over what we're trying to achieve. It is. Yeah. I fear that it's lost the purpose of what we're doing it for, who we're trying to serve at the end of the day. The amount of people that saying, we can create value, we will improve the shareholder return, we'll improve the profit. Missing the point. Why is the company existing? What do we do? If you do that well, everything else will follow. If you understand what we do as a team, we can start doing it together, we will achieve more. But at the moment, we're too thinly spread, focused on things that we don't actually know what the outcome is for. I think that is my fear. And I think people are starting to realise that. And I'm hoping that it's moving forward. It's not all like that. I don't want to paint this really negative picture of the whole world, but I just think that the people in organisations I speak to and what I've seen think we need to start working together a bit more and understand why we do certain things. It's not the what, it's the why.
I've said it on this. I've said this before, Graham, a few times, haven't I? I think we've ended up becoming a bit of a big to-do list, hasn't it? Work,
Yeah.
and a lot of that's driven by email. I think if you've got companies with email culture that just fill other people's inboxes, it just becomes a to-do list, and all you're doing every day is ticking it off and deleting, and not actually necessarily adding anything, but you're coming at the end of your day satisfied and go, well, I had 50 emails at the start, and now I've only got 15, so I've achieved something.
I've
You
pushed it
haven't really
all off
achieved
onto
something.
somebody else.
Yeah.
Exactly that. There is a piece of research, and I cannot remember it for the life of me, that shows about a third of the jobs that we put on our to-do list don't need to be done and never get done. And yet we put them on there and we pressure ourselves into having to complete it and having to do it. And we never get to the bottom. And we lament the fact that we never get to the bottom. I say to my clients, they say, well, I just haven't got through my to-do list. I said, imagine how boring life would be if you got to the bottom of your to-do list. Right?
What would you do if you finished it?
Right? What would you do? There'd be nothing left to do.
So that should be the task on the top of anyone's to-do list at the beginning of the day, which is to go through your to-do list and actually work out what really doesn't need to be done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The top item is don't finish to-do list.
Yeah. Don't finish. You'll feel so much better. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Hasn't it? It's been brilliant. Thank you so much to Richard and Joe. Thank you so much for coming along and having that conversation today. If you've been moved by Richard's poem or touched by what Joe has said about happiness and you want to know more, do connect with them on LinkedIn. Do share this show with other people as well so that more people can watch it. We'll be back 2 weeks' time for more of the same. Until then, you can catch up with previous episodes at WOW Ergonomics.com. Thank you for watching.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.